regarding wildlife and what are the main topics of my research team. So maybe later in the discussion or anytime later, if you are interested, we can discuss this in detail. And now it doesn't work, the PowerPoint, sorry. Yeah, now, okay, perfect. So the Czech Republic, European country, and our university is just in the very south of, or southeast of the country. This is the campus. Professor Hambal knows well how it is. Somewhere here is our department. And as it was mentioned, I'm already also a director of Czech NGO, Veterinary Sans Frontières, Czech Republic, which somehow creates a background of some of our projects, for example, in Africa, which are more like towards the, not really the research, but applied veterinary medicine. So only very briefly, like in few seconds, the topic we are dealing with, people from my team, they study the eco-epidemiology of parasitic diseases in large herbivores, more the domestic ones and the wild ones. Recently, we work also on anthelmintic resistance in cattle in the Czech Republic, which is not very exotic animal, but still it's important topic. We do the tick-borne diseases and the transmission of tick-borne diseases among various wildlife in Europe and in the Near East, using mainly the molecular tools as normal nowadays. Colleagues from my team study the parasites and pathogens of wild carnivores, the transmission between the domestic dogs, domestic cats, and the wild counterparts like the wolves, jackals, and wildcats in European mountains. We work a little bit on cetaceans in the Black Sea area, where we study the Toxoplasma gondii on porpoises. Closer to Southeast Asia, one of my PhD students work in malaria and toxoplasmosis in tropical Asian birds, both in captivity, and we hope also to connect it with populations in the wild. We work on the reptiles, studying emerging diseases like intranuclear coccidiosis of tortoises, which is nowadays attracting a lot of interest because the animals in captivity are dying because of that. And something that relates to my work with Professor Hambal in Sumatra. We work on Angiostrongylus cantonensis as a real threat for isolated island ecosystems, not only in Asia, but basically worldwide. Large cats and parasitic diseases of cheetah in Somalia, Africa, where we run also a volunteer program for the veterinarians and the students. So if any one of you is interested in volunteering stay with cheetah in Somalia, just give me a call and we can organize that. And last but not least, one of the major themes of my team are the parasitic diseases of great apes. And later in my talk, I will use it as an example of principles of emerging diseases. So we used to work on several field sites all across the tropical Africa with chimpanzees, lowland gorillas, and mountain gorillas. Well, so that was a very brief introduction. And now to my topic. As I said already, as I was introduced before, basically we are working somewhere between the topics of emerging infectious diseases, One Health, of course, and the conservation medicine, because so far our research targets primarily the endangered animals, which is basically the background for the conservation medicine as such. But today I will speak mainly about the emerging infectious diseases and their principles. And we will speak about the transmission of diseases both ways, not only from the animals to humans, but also from humans to the animals. So this picture I'm usually using in my lectures just to illustrate the process of the extinction. It's a very nice picture showing the biblical scene when the animals are loaded to the Ark of Noah. But nowadays, unfortunately, the same speed and the same way the animals are entering the black hole of the ship here, we are losing the species by the extinction. And relatively recently, it was revealed that infectious diseases, they play one of the important roles in the extinction of endangered organisms on the planet. And the interest in emerging infectious diseases in wildlife started roughly around the year 2000. One of the pilot articles that really introduced the topic to the broad broad spectrum of readers was this article in Science in 2000. And since then, we have the evidence of hundreds of cases or hundreds of pathogens that are emerging in wildlife and can really lead to the extinction or at least to severe population decline. Just to repeat briefly what the emerging infectious diseases are, unfortunately, thanks to COVID virus, we hear about that almost daily from the news. But anyway, based on the definition by CDC, the emerging diseases are those diseases that either suddenly appear in populations or the diseases of growing occurrence or the importance. And we can ask, of course, why it's happening now. Why 20 years ago no one cared about the emerging diseases, and nowadays basically it's influencing our daily life and it's influencing the biodiversity on the planet as well. The answer is not that straightforward, and first we have to say that it's not happening only now. If you look backwards to the history, at the end of 19th century there was probably first well-documented basically pandemics or large epidemics of animal disease, and it was introduction of rinderpest, the viral disease of cattle to Africa from Asia. And basically in 10 years, the virus devastated the populations of domestic but also wild ungulates all across the Africa, basically crossing the continent from the north to the south in less than 10 years. But other nice example of emerging diseases in the history was the colonization of Americas by the Europeans, and which brought their broad spectrum of the pathogens, which were basically unknown to native population or human population in Central and South America, and caused large epidemics in there during the time of Conquista. But still we can ask why it's happening so fast nowadays, why it is so frequent and why it is so important. In the history, those are only like isolated cases, but nowadays, as I said, basically it's our daily life is influenced by numerous emerging infectious diseases. The answer is relatively complicated and straightforward in the same time. Basically, it's part of the global change. All of us, we know that the global changes on the planet, it's not only popular global warming, but basically those are really complex and structural changes in the ecosystems and in basically the biosphere as such. And logically, the pathogens and the diseases are part of that. Basically, all the ecosystems are, or most of the ecosystems are facing biological invasions. And biological invasions, it means not only that the animals and plants are invading the new ecosystems, but it also means that the new pathogens, the new viruses, new parasites are invading new ecosystems. They are invading food chains. They are invading the basically populations of the animals and so on. Sometimes we also speak about the pathogen pollution, which relates to that. And from that, there is only one step towards the emerging infectious diseases. So basically, the global change is responsible for the diseases, and in the same time, the diseases are an important part of the global change. Yeah. This is a relatively simple scheme. I downloaded somewhere from the internet showing the reasons for the biodiversity loss. And you see that the diseases and the invasive species are mentioned among the 5 most important reasons for the fact that we are losing the biodiversity so fast in past, let's say, decades. Here are just few examples that of emerging infectious diseases that really have the importance in animals, just to show that they affect different groups of the organisms, different ecosystems. We can speak about chytridiomycosis in amphibians, we speak about the several diseases in avian hosts, but also in reptiles, mycoplasma in sea turtles, mammalian morbilliviruses, important group of emerging pathogens, but also infectious diseases of corals and the coral reefs, and many other. There are several ways how to classify the reasons for the emerging infectious diseases, or how to divide them. One of the most commonly used is dividing the causes of emerging infectious diseases into 4 categories. The first one are the changes of the ecosystems at the local or global level. The second is the movement of the pathogens and their hosts. The third one are the changes and evolution of the pathogens, I mean the genetic changes. And the fourth one, which is principally artificial, are the novel methods of the diagnostic. So it's not surprising that with development of new methods, we are discovering more and more diseases and more pathogens, but it doesn't necessarily mean they are new, these diseases. If you look to last coronavirus, which is nowadays devastating the planet, kind of, basically you can show that all these four categories are greatly overlapping, and in many emerging infectious diseases, it's very difficult to distinguish what's the major driver of the infection. If you look to the coronavirus, somewhere at the beginning, there was basically the alteration of the ecosystem. There was unnatural contact of the human population and the wildlife population, and the virus jumped from the wildlife to human population. But then immediately after, the spread of the virus around the globe, it's basically related only to the movement of the humans as the new host of the virus. And we already see, which is well known, that there are already subtle changes in the genome of the coronavirus. So also the evolution of the pathogen as such takes part in the emergence of the disease. And of course, with the novel methods of the diagnostics that we are developing basically on the daily basis, we see more and more, or we are more and more understanding the epidemiology of the disease and involvement of some potential animal hosts and so on. So it's just to show that it's not always straightforward to say which disease emerged because of alteration of ecosystems or because of movement of the pathogens. But still, I will try to follow in the second half of my talk these two categories to show some of the diseases that typically for which the ecosystem's alteration is responsible and for which the movement of the pathogens is responsible. So let's look to the first category. Of course, the climate change as one of the major parts of the global change has impact on several infectious diseases. But what we have to say that it's often combined with the other. So it's not always easy to distinguish which diseases are emerging because of the climate change or because of other reasons, because climate change is simply ongoing and it's affecting all the ecosystems globally. So the local ecosystem alteration are relatively easier to demonstrate, and we can say, and it's not surprising if we understand the ecology, that any changes in the ecosystems can lead to the changes in the pathogen transmission and the emergence of the diseases. And we have to say that those are not only the negative changes like the habitat degradation, but those can be also positive changes like the improvement of the habitat, the nature conservation and so on. It can also has an impact on the disease spread. Like across the Europe, we see so-called rewildering process, where basically, thanks to the nature conservation, thanks to reintroduction project, we see more and more wildlife living close to the humans. And of course, it creates basically new epidemiological situation and environment for the transmission of the diseases from wildlife to domestic animals and from wildlife to humans and breedwars. Like when I was young, the wolves, the large carnivores, they were basically extinct in entire Central Europe. But now, 40, 50 years later, we see them coming back. So logically, it creates environment for the transmission of the diseases from wolves to the dogs, for movement of the pathogens across the borders, and so on and so on. There are several diseases that were clearly demonstrated that they are influenced by the ecosystem changes, like Lyme disease all around the Northern Hemisphere and many other. But I will speak about one that directly relates to our work. I will speak about the parasites of mountain gorillas. In past 4 years, with my team, we work in Virungas, which are the mountains in Central to East Africa, where the last two subpopulations of mountain gorillas, eastern mountain gorillas, survive at Virunga Mountains and windy impenetrable forest. You know that the mountain gorillas in Africa, it's a kind of flag species for the nature conservation. They were considered, or they were classified as critically endangered until recently, however, and it's really positive, very recently, like a year ago, they were reclassified from critically endangered to endangered only because their population is growing. Of course, they receive maximum as a flag species for the mammalian conservation in East Africa. They receive maximum conservation effort. And in the same time, they are under the extreme pressure by the human population because they live basically in very isolated islands of the mountain forest in highly populated Rwanda and Uganda and Congo. So those are really the last little islands of the wilderness in that part of the world. And thanks to the intensive management, including the intensive veterinary management, the population nowadays is reaching around 1,000 individuals being divided between Vindi and Virungas. But very recently what we see is growing mortality among the older individuals, mainly the adult males. And to answer the question how much the parasites are involved in that, because there is a huge suspicion that parasites are responsible for recent mortalities in the mountain gorillas, my team kind of was invited to create a relatively large research team, intensively studying for 3 years the parasites of mountain gorillas. And what we really see that really in the mortalities, there are the parasites involved. We commonly see the large tapeworms, which is the Anoplocephala gorilla, but we also see a growing number of the strongyles in mountain gorillas. And all this opens the question, are there any changes in the transmission ecology of the parasites? That recently we see the parasites that are normal to the mountain gorillas, but recently we see them being responsible for the mortalities in these animals. So it's more or less technical question, it's scientific question. But then it opens a little bit more philosophic question, which relates to the basics or goes to the basics of the nature conservation. Shall we react somehow? Shall we start treating the mountain gorillas by the unhelminthings or not in this situation? So anyway, if you look to those two parasites that seems to be more and more abundant in the mountain gorillas, we can conclude that both of them, they have density-dependent transmission because they have the environmental stages. So in other words, more contaminated the environment is by the infective stages, higher the load of the worms in the intestine of gorillas, logically. So we started to do the quantification. We examined a couple like 2,000-3,000 of the samples. So basically we are able to monitor significant part of individuals living in Virungas. And our hypothesis was that at least in some areas of Virunga mountains, the density of the gorilla population is already too high, which facilitates the transmission of the parasites. And to our surprise, it really appeared to be true in a really significant level. Here you see the results of the numbers of or counts on the strongylid worms in two subpopulations of gorillas. One living in the area with very low population density, and the other living in the area with very high population density. And what you see are basically at least 100 times elevated, 50 to 100 times elevated numbers of the strongyles in those gorillas which are living in the area with high population density. If you work with the livestock, this is not surprising, of course. More animals you close into a fence, more parasitic diseases you see. And this is exactly what's happening. And this is kind of dark side of the nature conservation in relatively small protected areas, that once the number of the animals is reaching behind the carrying, above the carrying capacity of the environment, we can see real changes in the dynamics of not only the parasitic diseases, but also the other infectious diseases. Yeah. The other textbook case of the emerging diseases in wildlife are infections in the sea otters. This is not topic of my research, but it's well studied, and we can nicely demonstrate some reasons for the emergence of the diseases. You know that sea otters are large mammals living along the coast of eastern part of the United States. And in past 20 years, again, the high mortality among the animals, the adult animals, was seen. And relatively fast, the causes of the mortality were demonstrated as the infectious diseases. So more than 40% of around 40% of mortalities were caused by the infectious diseases. And the major pathogens detected were two species of Heteroxenus coccidia and two types of the Heteroxenus helminths, the Acanthocephalans. If you look at the first two, basically we know that both of these are the parasites of the terrestrial ecosystems. Yeah? They circulate among the mammals. in the terrestrial ecosystem. So how it comes that the sea otters are infected suddenly? And it was demonstrated by colleagues from UC Davis and their collaborators that basically it's the contamination of the water that is coming to the sea, bringing the oocysts of Toxoplasma gondii from the mainland, what's responsible for the transmission of the disease to the sea otters. Yeah. And it was published years ago. If you look at the second pathogen, it's even more complex. It's a Sarcocystis neurona, the parasite of possum. And if you look to the distribution of possum in the United States, basically we see two areas of distribution, the eastern one and the isolated western one. And this is where the sea otters live. But what we know that the possums were brought artificially by humans to this area in like 100 years ago or 200 years in the period, let's say 200 years ago. So, and it was again demonstrated quite well in the literature. So basically it's very difficult to distinguish what's happening. Is it the environmental change and the environmental pollution, or is it movement of the pathogens? In this case, those are the both reasons. The pathogens are moving from the areas to the new ecosystems and entering totally new food chains. I'm a little bit late, so I will skip few slides if you don't mind. And this is just the conclusion. So basically what we see with the sea otters are basically total changes in the marine ecosystem. We see the invasion by the pathogens, we see ecological changes, and we see the changes in the trophic web. And it's very difficult to fight with because basically this is the nature. And this is what we changed. And now we see the consequences. Yeah. Other nice example of emerging infectious disease and complex reasons for the emerging disease are the bats, which are probably also related to the last coronavirus epidemics. Yeah. There is nice review article summarizing the reasons for the emergence of so many diseases from the bats, because those are, of course, the viruses, Lissa viruses, Ebola, and Marburg, which are really severe, causing severe diseases of humans in Central Africa. Then the group of coronaviruses starting with SARS, then MERS coronavirus, and now the second SARS coronavirus, and also the Henipaviruses. Yeah. And of course, the media in past, let's say, 2 decades already, the media are full of the news of the diseases related to the bats, like you are in Southeast Asia, so you are quite aware of the several epidemics by the Nipah virus. And we can ask why so many viruses are related, why so many emerging diseases are related to bats? And the answers are quite complex, and there are several. First of all, the bats are the most diversified group, almost the second most diversified group of mammals. There are more than 1,000 species of bats. So it's not surprising that so many viruses relates to the bats. So if bats are creating 25% of mammalian diversity, then we can expect kind of that also 25% of the mammalian viruses can originate or can be found in bats. And then we have several ecological reasons. Bats are really mobile animals. They are very social, they live in the colonies of hundreds of thousands of individuals. They commonly live close to humans, not only in tropical countries like Southeast Asia, but also in Europe. We have the bats everywhere around us in the cities. And what's important, and it relates to the ecology and ecological changes, they very fast react to the habitat changes. Why? Because they are mobile, they can fly. So if they don't like the places which are being destroyed, if the forests are cut, like in Southeast Asia in some regions, then logically the fruit bats are moving to the other areas. They can be moving closer to humans because they find more food closer to humans, because of the fruits, because of the vegetables, fruits planted and in the agriculture and so on. In last minutes, few examples of the movement of the pathogens and their hosts. Yeah, strictly. Of course, there always was a movement of the animals, the natural movement. Then there is a lot of accidental movement of the pathogens. But mainly when we speak about the endangered species and the nature conservation, we should keep in mind that there is a lot of intentional movement. Nowadays, we see a range of translocation projects. We see reintroduction projects of the wildlife, and we see also introductions of the animals to totally new areas. And all this is extremely connected with the diseases. And once we start moving the animals from one habitat to the another, once we start taking the animals from the captivity, releasing them back to the wild, it really creates enormous risk of emergence of the infectious diseases in the wild populations. I'll skip this. Sorry for that, the time is pushing us. And one of the really important groups of viruses which devastate the wildlife and are kind of related to the movement of the pathogens are the morbilliviruses. And what stays behind, one of the important ones are the domestic dogs. All of us, we are aware of the canine distemper as a disease of the domestic dogs. But in the same time, this virus is highly pathogenic, I would say even extremely pathogenic for the sea mammals, like are the seals around the world, but also for the carnivores, like the wild dogs in Africa, Ethiopian wolves. And recently, we also see small epidemics of canine distemper in the lions in Serengeti National Park. And what's behind is basically the growing contact of the domestic dog with the wildlife. And why it is? Because the population of the domestic dogs is extremely growing. Nowadays, we estimate that there is 1 billion of domestic dogs living on the planet, which is not that surprising considering the human population. But what surprised me that more than 80% of these dogs are so-called free roaming dogs. So basically, these are dogs which are not fully controlled by the human population or by their owners, and they are the source of the infectious diseases. And it's not only canine distemper, but it's also rabies, of course, specifically in Southeast Asia. The rabies virus the dogs are important source of the rabies. And rabies is one of the examples of successful projects of the protection of the wildlife. Maybe you heard about the project AFIA Serengeti, which basically aims to conservation of mammals in East Africa by vaccinating the dogs all around the Serengeti National Park and creating a ring of basically immunized dogs that stops spread of the infection towards the wildlife. Yeah. And last of the morbilliviruses I want to speak about, because it has a really devastating effect on wildlife, is PPR. Again, you probably know, at least those of you that are veterinarians, you know about PPR virus, which is an important pathogen of small livestock. But recently, in 2017, there was huge epidemics of PPR in saiga antelopes, which were one of the most important herbivores on Central Asian ecosystems in the steppe areas of Central Asia. And basically, we saw the mortality more than 80% in the wild population of the saiga antelopes. And of course, it creates the question, okay, if we reduce the population of this dominant wild ungulate, how the wild carnivores will react to that? Yeah, because they are losing the food. And all the food chain is changed dramatically. We don't know yet. It's a very recent issue, but we can expect that it can have kind of cascade effect on the entire ecosystem of the steppe areas of Central Asia. Again, skip of that. Sorry, I'm getting late. I want to go to the very end, and I want to show you example or answer to the question if we can change the disease epidemiology in wildlife. Because so far my talk was quite negative. Our diseases are emerging, animals are dying, we are losing the biodiversity. But we are veterinarians, we are biologists, we are infection biologists. So can we do something? We can. I show at least one example of successful application of control measures for the infectious disease, in this case of Ethiopian wolves. These are really nice, amazing carnivores living in isolated Ethiopian mountains, especially in Bale Mountain in central Ethiopia. And they are really devastating by the diseases shared with the domestic dogs, which is canine distemper and rabies. Here's just shown on this two charts from recent publications how devastating the effect of the diseases is. Here you see the density of the animals, and you see the events of the transmission from dogs by canine distemper, and you see the drop of the population. Even more strict is more obvious it's in rabies. Yeah, immediately after introduction of rabies to the particular population, the density goes down. And because those are two common diseases of dogs, we already have in hands the tools how to control these diseases, and it's the vaccination. And this is what started just 2 years ago in Bale Mountains in Ethiopia, is the program of oral vaccination of the Ethiopian wolves, following the successful eradication of rabies in European countries by oral vaccination. So now the scientists are moving towards the wildlife, and it seems that we have the tools how to prevent these diseases in wildlife. And I'll skip the second case and go to the very end of my lecture. I just want to stress here among us that, among the people that listen us, that when we speak about the conservation medicine, it's not about the individuals. We are not speaking that much about the health of individual animals. Of course, it's important. Every single animal is important. But basically, conservation medicine deals with species survival. Yeah, so it's an ultimate, it's a tool, or it's a platform on which we can really contribute to the survival of the species. And of course, it's really important a part of the One Health approach, which includes also the human health. And the last coronavirus, again, it's a nice example that we cannot ignore the diseases of the wildlife. We cannot ignore the fact that diseases are spread from wildlife to the animals. But if you look to the last coronavirus, and if you look how devastating effect it had on the mink, captive mink populations in Asia, in Europe and US, it's also shown that then the humans can spread the diseases back to the animals. And this is what the One Health platform is about. Yeah, so definitely we are living in the environment which is greatly changed. We basically really devastated the ecosystems of the planet. We created a series of the emergence of the various pathogens, and now we are responsible for doing something with that. Not only studying that, but also finding the solution, not only for wildlife, but also for the humans. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor David. I guess we keep these questions and discussion later on after the break. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our second speaker, Professor Dr. Musa Yavuz. He'll be talking about global food security post-pandemic COVID-19, prospect and strategy for sustainable livestock productions. Briefly about Professor Dr. Musa, he received a PhD in animal science from the University of Tennessee. He has more than 20 years experience in his field. And he's currently at Sparta Applied Sciences University and has more than 10 years of experience as researchers and academics. So without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Musa to give next presentation.
Okay, I am going to share my screen also. Okay, actually I am going to, I would like to be there, but in March, when the COVID-19 started, we were planning to visit Banda Aceh, but what happened is we decided not to go there. Why we didn't go there? Because we thought that we might got the COVID-19. But in March, I got it in here, in my hometown. And this was the another unique unique situation for my life. And I can understand the people who is suffering from the COVID-19 because I was the one of them who stayed at the hospital more than a month. And 14 days I was intubated, and I was in 18 or 20 days in the hospital, and it wasn't easy for me. But overall, these diseases are for us. We may suffer, animals also, which they are suffering, but life goes on. We have to go in our life. For that reason, when I invited for this conference, I was after the hospital, which I went to home. But at between these times, there are many things I can think of it, and people, they are staying at home and they are thinking also. I believe they are thinking more in what they love, maybe their families, maybe their animals, maybe their environments. And I think this COVID-19 gives us good things to think about what we have. And I'm going to start with my presentation right now. global food security post-pandemic COVID-19 prospects and strategies for sustainable livestock production. COVID-19 was spread from China to all over the world. It is affecting every person, especially elderly and those who have chronic illnesses, which I had diabetes. Some productive measures against the COVID-19 have been taken, restriction on travel. And this is also a big issue after the COVID-19. Measures to reduce mass mobility, measures for work life, measures at health institutions, evacuation operations. Some of the foreign workers, they had to be evacuated from their country, and economic measures, which all of this affected us very intensely. Agriculture products, foods are one of the strategic commodities for every country. There are many sectors that affecting each other, but agriculture is the most important one. There are many countries that depending on exports and imports of agricultural products. Sustainable agriculture and animal production are becoming more difficult for animal producers under the COVID-19 pandemic. Every country needs to decide its future strategies for sustainable livestock production for post-pandemic period. There are the biggest issues, especially food security. Food security refers to secure access to sufficient amounts of nutrients, food for normal human growth, development, and an active, healthy life. If we don't have this, then there is the biggest problem. Each country should ask the question of self-sufficiency in their agriculture or in their country, because most of the countries, they are not self-sufficient in this, especially for their population, they are not providing enough food. How do we understand this? Because there are some tracking measurements established by FAO, UNICEF, and other organizations. Undernourishment tracking data is stunting of the child, anemia in the women's, low birth weight for the babies, overweight for the peoples or babies, exclusive breastfeeding or vesting. These all data or gives us if the people they are undernourished or not, and they are tracking based on because the most women, when they have a birth, they have to go to the hospital. The government and the institution, they do get this data from these people, and because of that reason, most of the data developed from the women and children instead of men, because men doesn't go to the hospital most of the time, and because of that reason, there are many problems also included in the man life. Now, when we look at this chart on the right side, there are a number of affected peoples, and one of the things is people they are affected standing. I am sorry, I have to vesting, overweight. These three issues, it was looked at 2019, and when we look for the standing, there is a decrease in the standing because children they are getting more food or nutrition. It shows that we are improving all over the world, but for the overweight also there are some improvement. At 2000 we actually they are getting more overweight because they are getting more food, because overweight also there's a big health problem for the countries, especially developed countries. People they are eating more and they are getting unhealthy also. When we look for this map, we see there are different countries, green, light, or red, or some other countries. These are the showing that people who has undernourished children. Australia has the lowest level. The United States, Turkey, and China has maybe less people undernourished, but Indonesia, for the children, it is 30.5% of the population of the children under 5 years old, they are undernourished. Because of those red areas, mostly the problems area, we need to check and look for those people. This is also track for the undernourished people, 2004 to 2009. There's an improvement in the Indonesia, but in 2017, there is increase also undernourished peoples. Most of the countries, actually most children require healthy food, which comes from animal sources, milk, meat, egg, and others. Why it is important? Because these foods are biologically more close to our body, and when we eat those food or foods, we digest better than other foods like plant sources. And because of that, especially young children, they need to take these foods in daily basis to improve their growth, and they need to take certain amount of in each day. Oops. The animal food production, because of that reason, is very important. If we reduce the amount of the production of the animals, then we have a problem. Sometimes countries, what they do, they export what they produce, whatever they produce, because they want to get the money, and they don't think about their people, and there are shortage and increased price in those countries. Then people, they become more poor and they cannot reach the products which is they produced already. Livestock production is one of the issues because there are small and large animal production enterprises in the world, and the number of the small enterprises has higher percentage of animal production. Actually, when we look for the bigger should have the larger amount of animals, but in the world, when we look small numbers of the farmers or small producers has the biggest number of animals. And when we concentrate it, usually we look for the biggest, and this is the which we need to concentrate on. Especially this enterprise had a problem reaching the social animal markets, labor, fees, and equipments. For this reason, they do not have no sufficient resources, and they have to finance their what they are going to take. And for that reason, economic and health crisis, during the economic and health crisis, they need to get money from the bank, from the government. But usually banks, they do not give them the funding because the risk is higher for those small businesses. And only government funding is available most of the time. Another problem is food tracing ability, because food tracing is important, especially diseases, and most of the countries, they need to track the food where it's come from, and if there's any problems, they need to recognize it. Especially this type of human who has the diseases from the animals or foods, it needs to be traceable. One of the problem is most of the countries or small farmers, they do not have organization like cooperatives. If they don't have cooperatives, then they cannot collaborate each other, and they cannot compete with the bigger farms or international producers. For that reason, most of the country needs to have, or small farmers needs to have cooperatives, and with the cooperatives could ease solving common problems and seeking help from the state, it will become much more easier. This is one of the farms we visited in Turkey. It is close by, and this farm raising imported animals for meat production. It is like 20 or 30 animals. This farm also, they utilize imported animals and local breeds, which inbred, and they are raising for meat production. We can see that there are, because the importing the animals from the outside or raising those animals, sometimes it requires more money or more economical power. But the small farmers, they cannot support or they cannot have that power. Because of that reason, they are utilizing most on local animals. Sustainability of animal production was at risk before the COVID-19 because 40% of the farmers are over 50 years old. Older people should hand over the farm production to young people. However, most young generation is not interested in working in animal production. I believe this is the one of the issues what we are facing in all over the world. Even though those who are interested in opening their businesses, the younger generation cannot afford to start a new farm, and when the animal farm is inherited, mostly it is too late for them because they become older also. Livestock farming was used to be abandoned gradually by the small farmers, and COVID-19, I believe it is going to be increase this. People used to inherit their culture to next generation. This is one of the issues we need to take because when people, they are growing with the animals, they can understand the animals and they can treat the animals better. If they never been exposed to the animals production, it will be hard to do business for those people also. Young people needs to be supported by the government. How do they going to be supported? One of the issues is everybody can do farm or farm type of jobs, but if we educate the people, especially higher education is needed, farmlands, farm production size, and usually some of the countries, they do select for the higher education farmers' children for agriculture, animal science, and veterinary science, but some of the countries, they do not select especially from the farmers' children. We need the positive discrimination to support animal production based on their education, and government should give them, support them based on their education, because if they are going to train for that job, they should have that job in, they should work in that area also. Another problem is labor. Livestock production requires heavy labor, and it continues 24 hours a day. Local or foreign labor is employed by most of the farms. COVID-19 restriction on travel caused problems for people to work, especially those who have to travel. Most countries thought to eliminate foreign labor beginning of the pandemic. The animal farm and related business owners had a difficult time to find workers. This was a challenging situation for most of the farmers. Another problem was accessing the necessary information about this process, and conditions for cleaning and social distances were very inadequate for especially employees. Labor problems can be reduced with technology. This is some automation of the animal farming system, especially unmanned livestock production can be done with the fully automatic systems, which is available right now. These systems are costly, but it can be a solution to finding cheaper labor in the near future, because I believe we will not have the labors in the farm, because we will not, people, they are not going to select the animal production. That will be the biggest issue, I believe. There are problems, especially processing and distribution. Livestock farm produced continuously during COVID-19. There is no problem maybe, but these may not have affected the production, but processing and distribution of the product were not possible early COVID-19 because they could not send their products to other places. Most states banned people from transporting their products locally, especially dairy farmers had a bigger problem because milk should be transported to processing companies daily. The dairy farmers could not sell the milk and had to pour their meat to the land. Beef producers could not send their animals to the local market or slaughterhouse for processing. They had to feed animals longer. Poultry production also had similar problems. Livestock-related sectors decreased slaughtering and processing capacity because processing companies could not sell their products because the markets were closed. Customers could not buy because of the curfew and decreased income. Livestock producers may lose their routine customers. Poor will get poorer and could not afford animal products after the pandemic. Domino effects was seen in many areas during the COVID-19 pandemic, not just between the countries, but also production sites. To break the cycle, the states should subsidize small farmers to reduce cost and ensure the animal products to reach poor families with less price. I think most governments, they are doing this. And also government and municipals can open shops which could allow to sell customers with lower price to regulate increased food prices. Sometimes big markets, they do not buy from the small farms, and people, they cannot sell their products. And because of that, some small farms, especially with the government and municipal help, they could sell their product much more easily. There are another issues in COVID-19, import and export. Why it is important? Because 70 or 80% cost of animal production comes from feed. And if you don't have enough feed for animals, or if you don't have enough food for humans, then there is a problem. Especially feed ingredients, soybean, corn, colza, vitamins, minerals are exported from large producing countries to importing countries. And mostly these countries also produce livestock production, especially biggest exporting countries. I took the number for soybean. I didn't take corn, colza, or vitamins because China is the biggest producer for vitamin and mineral production in the world. Brazil is maybe soybean is important for humans and animals. Brazil exports the biggest amount of the soybean in the world, and China also imports biggest amount of the soybean in the world. And there are many other countries it can be looked at, but every country is depend on the other countries, because there is no one country produces everything, and we have to take from other countries to what they have, what we don't have. This is the feed exporting and importing 2019 to 2020. Between this time, Netherlands is biggest, United States, Germany, Belgium, China. Important countries, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, France, and Vietnam. We can see countries they are exporting and importing. Why is that? Because these countries taking raw materials and using technology and selling to the other countries. Because of that reason, they do buy and sell the products. We need to look in that way. Okay. Some countries buy and process these raw materials and technology. And what happens is during the COVID-19, transportation were not allowed, and the feed prices increased, the food prices increased, and this is continues in some areas. But the biggest issue is poor is getting poor. We need to stop this. To reduce imported feeds, we need to use alternative local feed sources. Most of the agricultural scientists, they are looking for it, or animal scientists or other scientists. High producing animal or local breeds, we need to select one of them, because high producing animals, they require also high quality feed. Local breeds, they require only what is available in locally. One of the things issues we need to discuss also high production, cost and profit. Sometimes high production is not equal to profit, but it may lower the profit also. Another thing is each country regulates imports tariffs, because when they are bringing in some of the stuff like products, if they are producing in their country, they need to give them the chance to compete with the other countries, because some countries subsidize the products, and local producers, they cannot compete with them. One of the issues, especially after COVID-19, because many countries looking for the tourists to visit their sites, and transportation were not allowed, tourists were not allowed, events were cancelled, borders were closed. In a certain, after a couple of months, the governments, they decided, because the economy was going bad, to open the borders. Later, international travelers, especially tourists, were invited in many countries, but travelers looking safe travel, hotel, restaurant, and health services, which is provided by those countries. And for that reason, some of the countries, they did not get enough tourists or tourist people. Economy is recovering faster in many areas, including tourism, but the problem is tourism is already passed for 2020. Why it is important, tourism? Because most of the festivals, local restaurants, and other places, they are selling meat products or animal products. Because of that reason, some of the festivals takes 2 million or more than 2 million people in a couple of months. And those places, they sell animal products. And when these festivals were canceled, events were canceled, people, they did not go. People who used to do businesses, they had to cancel this. One of the things for us reaching healthy food and giving healthy food to the children and women is important, and the world is trying to measure how many people they are not insufficiently feeding or getting food. But one of the things is the world needs to get together and step to fight against hunger, because in our history, no economy and no food safety, it is going to start the wars. And we are hearing some of the countries, presidents, they are saying that be ready to fight. And some of them, China and others, and right now there are some wars going on. This is not because of people, they want the war, but the food safety is, I believe, one of the issues, and economy other issues. Decision makers and scientists to find solution, because this is our job, and decision makers, they need to make a decision based on scientific evidence. If we don't use this, then there is a big problem. If we cannot solve this problem, then people, they are going to use their not mind, but the feelings and hungers. It may cause the big problem. COVID-19 pandemic is not the first challenge, because in the history of the humans, there are many wars against the diseases, but the COVID-19 vaccine almost ready for several countries. They are saying that we are ready for the giving the shot to the people, but probably a couple of them, it will be accepted in the world. And for that reason, I believe this COVID-19 will, in a couple of months, will be should be history in our life. But we should expect new diseases, because a couple of years ago, some diseases were used, and some flus were passed. It wasn't pandemic, but some of the epidemics we have seen. For that reason, these are our experience. We need to carry it to the next generation. I would like to thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Professor Musa. So I think we should proceed with the very last presenter, Professor Dr. Jean-Michel Het. So I would like to introduce you to Professor Dr. Jean-Michel Het. He studied veterinary medicine at University of Geneva at the University of Zurich. Following graduation, he worked at the Clinic of Zoo Animals, Exotic Pets and Wildlife at the University of Zurich, and at the Royal Veterinary College at the University of London, where he obtained a Master's of Science in Wild Animal Health. Since 2001, Dr. Het is director of the Clinic of Zoo Animals, Exotic Pets and Wildlife at the University of Zurich, and chief veterinarian of the Zurich Zoo. Dr. Jean-Michel Het is a diplomate of the American and European College of Zoological Medicine. In 2011, he spent almost 6 months sabbatical in Indonesia and was teaching at the Universitas Syiah Banda Aceh. And since 2018, he co-organizes a special competence wildlife veterinary training course also at the Universitas Syiah. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Jean-Michel Het to present his talk on wildlife, new emerging disease and One Health. Dr. Jean-Michel?
Yes, thank you very much. for the kind introduction. And I'm just looking for my presentation to start it. Can you see my presentation, I hope?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm very happy to be able to lecture, to give a keynote lecture on this conference, second international conference for veterinary, animal, and environmental sciences. And the topic, wildlife, new emerging diseases, and One Health is a topic that is very dear to me, but also I think it's very timely. It's a topic that is keeping us very busy at the moment and will also give us a lot of work in the future. As the kind introduction also pointed out, I am working at the University of Zurich, currently at the Clinic of Zoo Animals, Exotic Pets and Wildlife. And if any of you have interest to follow us a bit on Twitter, not only about new emerging diseases, but also other publications we're doing and patients we're seeing, please feel free to follow us on our Twitter account. So I would like to start and discuss the topic of emerging infectious diseases in general. It's a topic that, or a word, I would say, that is, of course, very, very famous at the moment. But we should not forget that 30 years ago, this word was hardly a major issue. If we looked at 30 years ago and we're looking for an emerging infectious disease, there was basically HIV was probably the word that would pop up. And if we talk today about emerging infectious diseases, there are huge amounts, many. There is a lot of research going on. There are many journals also that are solely focused on emerging infectious diseases. We should not forget that diseases have emerged since millions of years. And they will continue to emerge. This is especially regarding infections, the process of evolution and the adaptation of these organisms will always result in emerging infectious diseases. So this is basically not something new. It's just that we have become very aware, and there are different factors for this, and they are causing us problems, and that's why we are also doing a lot of research on them. In this slide, I would like to point out that we are differentiating between different types. We have so-called new emerging diseases, such as, for instance, the Nipah virus, or currently, of course, Corona. We have re-emerging or resurging diseases that occur suddenly in a new region, West Nile virus, for instance. And we are also talking about deliberately emerging diseases. Luckily, there are very few of them, but we should not forget them. Anthrax, that is, for instance, used for bioterrorism, is such a disease. So emerging infectious diseases is certainly a very, very important topic, and it affects not only wildlife, of course, domestic animals, humans, all of them together, or only parts of them. Now, when we talk about new emerging infectious diseases, and I put on purpose a question mark here, we should not forget that sometimes they're not really new. It's just that we become aware of them, but they might have been around for a while. And as a clinician, I always say you only find what you look for. if you don't look for, you will not find it. And as such, some of the so-called new emerging diseases might have been actually for quite a while. We know that from HIV, and eventually we became aware of them. But regarding, especially also for wildlife populations, and if we talk now about emerging infectious disease in wildlife, there are basically three modes on how, based on epizoontology, emerging diseases become an issue. So on one hand side, we are having spillover cases. So basically from domestic animals, diseases can spill over into wildlife. In my country, mycoplasma is a major issue that spills over from sheep that are grazing in the mountain, spill over into ibex, for instance. We have emerging infectious diseases that are basically moving into wildlife because of human intervention. This is an issue, of course, that habitat destruction is an important aspect, but also, of course, translocation of certain animals in another area can cause an emerging of disease. And then there are also diseases with no overt human or domestic animal involvement can become emerging. That can be, for instance, as a cause of climate. One such disease is the chytrid disease, which I will talk about later, in amphibians, that has a huge impact on amphibian populations in several continents, many countries. And the reason for it appearing is likely multifactorial, but for instance, climate change is certainly an aspect that is there, but which indirectly, of course, has also human intervention in it. So when we look at this, this graph here, shows the different factors that can play into the emergence of disease. And I would like to point out two aspects, which I will mention a bit later. Urbanization, a very, very critical aspect, but also agricultural intensifications are two key factors, beside, of course, others, but that we have to keep in mind also with respect to then the One Health concept. That diseases can emerge, and especially when there is no overt reason for it, like a translocation, transportation of infectious agents, is often a cause or a result due to the damage we do to nature. Nature has to be in balance. We are profiting a lot of this balance. I will talk about on the next slide about the service that we get from an intact nature. We talk about ecosystem service, we call that. And we should always keep in mind that nature is not only just beautiful for us to look, we derive our food from it. We derive many medications, water, for instance, but we also derive from it our mental health. I'm now currently in isolation because of coronavirus. In my home, I cannot go out as I would like, and I'm not so happy about that. I have to say, I would be much happier if I could be outside. But there is also, of course, diseases. Nature keeps under control certain diseases, keeps the spread of disease in a balance, because of course no disease or infectious agent has an interest to kill every host. So there has to be a balance, and if this balance exists, then it is often a sign that obviously nature is in balance. And of course, there are many, many other aspects which are very important in nature in balance, and not only about diseases. We also derive a lot of money from an intact nature. So this term ecosystem service means the service that we are getting from an intact nature. And that is on one hand side because of the ecosystem itself, but part of it also because of the intact biodiversity. So this is very important for us, and globally we depend in the amount that we get basically from an intact nature is $41 trillion. So this is a huge amount of money. It's about 55% of the GDP depends on intact ecosystem services. Water is, of course, a very critical aspect, and we should not forget that. And if we look here at this map in the world, the green areas are areas that have a very, very high value regarding their ecosystem, and Indonesia and especially also Sumatra are top areas. So it's very important to keep this ecosystem in balance, also because of emergence of diseases. And unfortunately, about 20% of the countries, based on a recent study, have ecosystems that are in a very, very fragile state, and more than 1/3 of their land is in a critical situation. Countries like Malta, Israel, Cyprus, Bahrain, or Kazakhstan belong there, but others as well. So it is very important to keep this in mind in relation to ecosystem services and emerging diseases, what a nature in balance means. So with the world being out of balance in many situations, this affects obviously a lot of animal species, and because of infectious diseases that are spreading. And I mentioned already the chytrid disease, a fungus. So it's not only about viruses that we have to deal with. Funguses are very, very important as well. And chytrid is a prime example that shows us how in a very short time a disease can spread all over the world, and not only cause reduction in biodiversity and reduce number of species. In Mesoamerica, for instance, where the chytrid disease is strongest, basically, we've had species that went extinct most likely because of this disease. Numbers have gone down in many countries, and it's a disease that has in a very short time spread, and to fight this disease and try to get it under control, it is very, very challenging. And One Health, the possibilities that we get through One Health will be something that we have to discuss. But there are also indirect threats for biodiversity, such as now the issue with coronavirus has led in many countries to active interventions against bats and flying foxes. And also in my country, there have been suddenly a lot of criticism with bats living in cities, and it has emerging diseases can also have an indirect effect on biodiversity. And besides the disease itself that they might carry, hosts of emerging infectious diseases that are brought into new habitats, such as these moths that have entered North America, they can also damage plants, of course. When we talk about the effect in biodiversity, we should not forget the issue on plants. So emerging infectious diseases and the threat they can have for species and biodiversity is especially critical in areas in the world where there is an enormously high density of species, animal and plant-based. And I think to point out that Indonesia and especially Sumatra is a crucial area in this world regarding biodiversity is something that you all know, that this is really very important, and that's why it's of utmost importance that this area is protected as much as possible, and not only because of emerging infectious diseases. Our big challenge, and a challenge that also faces Indonesia has to face with, and I mentioned before, is urbanization. The UN projects that in 2050 we'll have 70% of the population living in cities. Cities are expanding, and if we look on this map, we look which areas are currently have the highest numbers or density numbers of the population living in cities. This is certainly in South America and Australia, but also, of course, Europe and Asia have very high densities. And as a result, urbanized surfaces are increasing. If we look at this map here, this graph here, we see how for many hundreds of years, the surface of cities have not really increased, and it's basically in the last 100 years that there have been an exponential increase in the surface of cities. And with respect to emerging infectious diseases, cities are absolutely crucial points. They have an extremely high density of humans, but also of animals, also of wildlife, can be with some species quite high. They are typically first points of entry for diseases, for many diseases. And the cities are more and more recognized as areas and ecosystems to be studied because of their importance for emerging diseases. And this map here shows the spread of West Nile virus in the United States, which started here on the East Coast in the area of New York, and within a couple of years has been spreading nearly through the whole country. But the entry point were cities. Often also are from aspects such as light and climate, heat. They are in a much more favorable habitat for certain diseases, and that can be the starting point for many diseases. Another aspect is factory farming. The last 100 years have not only increased the cities, but also increased the number of domestic animals. We are relying heavily on the of the world and the people. This aspect has increased. And if we look today at the world and we look at the mammals on the earth, the number of mammals on the earth, there is 69% are humans and livestock. Wildlife is only 4% if we regard on the land mass. So that is amazing, and this huge number also of domestic animals has also to be considered as a system, an ecosystem for diseases. We know that many diseases can develop in farm animals and spread. And of course, with the number of these animals increasing dramatically, and I would like especially to point out poultry that has increased enormously in the last years, we have also increased, of course, the potential for diseases to multiply, evolve, and then spread onto other species. So before getting to the One Health aspect, a few numbers that I would like to draw your attention on, and I think we have to keep in mind, is that 60% of existing human infectious diseases are zoonotic. So animals play an important role, and emerging infectious diseases also in wildlife often also cause problems and disease in humans. 57% of emerging infectious diseases of humans have an animal origin, so not only wildlife, but also wildlife. And we have about 5 human diseases appear every year, and more than half of them are from animal origin. And yeah, 80% of the agents with potential bioterroristic use are zoonotic pathogens. So we have to really be aware of these emerging diseases. It's not only fashionable at the moment, it's really very important for our world, not only for mankind, but also for the whole world. And we have to control emerging infectious diseases wherever and however we can. So in a world out of balance, the One Health concept has become very popular in the last years, and I think it's a very important approach to deal also with emerging diseases. It's important. The One Health approach is not only about emerging infectious diseases. The One Health approach is, for instance, also about another very important topic, is antimicrobial resistance. Basically, the One Health approach, again, it's a bit, for me, like emerging diseases. It's not that it has just popped up in the last 30 years. It has been around for a long time, and One Health has also been around for a long time, but it is recognized as a concept and promoted as a concept, and we're being made aware of, and that is, I think, what is important. So the One Health concept, what is special about it, that it combines, it interrelates different specialty areas to solve a problem, and to basically approach problems in a, as we say, holistic approach. So not only treat the symptoms, but really treat the disease that will bring much more long-lasting effects. So One Health is certainly a very important aspect, especially also for emerging infectious diseases, because it doesn't only look at the issue of human, it doesn't only look at the issue of animals or only the environment, it combines it, and by that it basically has the potential to solve complex problems in a much more efficient and long-lasting approach. Here is a graph that shows us how the interrelation for certain diseases, for the spread of certain diseases can be, and what areas need to be tackled in a One Health approach to solve this disease. So the example here is West Nile virus again, which obviously we have a situation where we have a global pool of species. Now, in this global pool of species, new species are introduced. In this case, it's the US. Some of these species then can survive in an initial introduction, and they might even be able to multiply. And from these ones, there might then in the case of West Nile virus, it will be some Culex mosquitoes that can survive, will be able to take up the virus and transmit the virus, and then we have the condition as we have it now in North America, where it spreads all over. An important aspect for this is, for instance, climate change that can promote the survival or support the survival. And it can also be, of course, that the introduction of such hosts can be through the globalized world by plane. So all these aspects, if we want to solve an issue, we should not only treat against the mosquitoes, but obviously we have to follow several tracks, and climate change, introduction of diseases can be approaches. Everybody who is flying, who has been flying to Australia, knows that before, when you land, the stewardesses go through the plane with sprays, and the reason is to not introduce certain insects. To approach diseases, emerging infectious diseases on a One Health approach, I think we're living it at the moment. What needs to be done? We are not only talking about the research that has to be done to solve an issue. Of course, this is the basis, and currently I think we're following in real time how research is adding to the solving of the problem. And as we heard in the last presentation of Professor Musa, vaccination is crucial. This is real-time research that is happening, but it's not the only approach. We need to have policies. So the governments have to be included. Different stakeholders have to be included in the One Health approach to solve a problem, and it has to be, of course, managed, organized. So we need players that will help to coordinate such interventions to effectively then solve an issue. And even if we manage to get coronavirus under control, we will have to continue survey the disease and be aware of if it's restarts in certain areas. So it's very important in the One Health approach, and I think this is where it has a very big future and is very important, is that it combines different specialities to approach a problem and not only looks at it from one side. And I mentioned One Health is not, I think, something that has just started a couple of years ago. I think the way we have eradicated rinderpest is a fine example how different stakeholders have joined together to eradicate a disease that in the last 100 years has caused huge financial losses. And has been for the agricultural industry a big problem. And through different measures, but especially also through vaccination, we have managed over the years to really reduce this disease from originally a global distribution, more and more just bringing it down to Asia, let's say, and Africa. And at the end, only Kenya. And in 2001, the last case of rinderpest was seen. And today, we are considered, the world is considered free of rinderpest. This is a fantastic result, and it's an example where effectively One Health was already applied, even if in that time we didn't talk about One Health. But this is an example, and I think it should give us the strength and the positive attitude to fight other challenges that we have and that we will have for sure in the future again. So thank you very much. And I would like to stop with this beautiful picture that shows us that we always have to look at things from different angles, and things that look like in a certain way might actually be something very different. So this is a butterfly. Thank you. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Jean-Michel. So we already have questions here for Prof. David Mori. The question is from Muhammad Hanafia. So for those the participants that joining the conference at the moment, you can write your question at the chat box, so we can read the questions. So the panel can respond to the questions. So the first question's from Muhammad Hanafia. He asked, how is sea otter can be infected by Toxoplasma? Is that oocysts from Toxoplasma that can survive in the seawater? Approximately how long it can survive? What technique or method that Prof. David used to be able to easily detect the difference between oocysts from Toxoplasma and Sarcocystis, is it? Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question, and basically you already answered in part. Yes, those are the oocysts that contaminate the seawater, and the different marine mammals are getting in contact with oocysts in some part of the food chain. Some marine organisms are able to filtrate the oocysts from the water, and then they can accumulate in mollusks, they can accumulate in some part of fish and so on. So this is the first question. Yes, the water is contaminated by the oocysts, which are coming with influx water into the sea. And the second question, how to diagnose? It's very difficult to detect it in the seawater because you have to filter enormous amount of the water, but then anyway, the molecular tools are the way how to distinguish these parasites. Because Sarcocystis, Neurona and other Sarcocystis and Toxoplasma, they can be easily distinguished by molecular tools. Is that enough?
I hope that's answered the questions. For the one that asked the questions. All right, let's go to the next questions. What to the same to you also, that Prof. David, what do you think about the possibility, the mutation of COVID or SARS-CoV in wildlife animals, especially in bat, with the range time very fast? Any possible that it's not come from nature?
Yeah, I'm not really the expert on the SARS viruses, but so the question is if it is coming from nature, or I now don't understand very exactly the question.
The question goes about what do you think about the possibility of the mutation of COVID in wildlife, especially in bat?
What I know, it's believed that the virus originates from the bat, so I wouldn't expect that much mutations in bat populations. But what we see are slow changes of the virus in other hosts, like the humans. So the risk probably is that it can jump to the other animals and mutate even further, and so on. So in the bats themselves, I don't see the risk of that much mutations if we believe, or if we consider the bats or chiropterans to be the original hosts of the virus.
Cool, thank you. So the next question to Professor Musa from Dr. Hambal. I'm interested in positive discrimination to support animal production based on education. What is it, your suggestion to apply this in country like Indonesia? Is there any success story?
Actually, biggest problem is in our country and most of the world. Anybody can do the farming. That is the biggest challenge, because if you say anybody, then you don't need education means. That is the, I think, biggest issues. What we are trying to do, we are trying to provide the healthy food. And when we look all the problems, it is coming from uneducated peoples who does the work. Because of that reason, I think success in every areas, including agriculture, animal science, veterinary science, these people who work in the area, then we will have less problems. Because otherwise, if we let people who doesn't understand what is really going on, then we will have more problems in these areas, and we will have the less production, diseases, and people, they are going to stop what they are producing it. But one of the things is, if we can provide the education for those people who is really in this area, then we can help future generation. One of the things in United States, and I believe there's many countries, they are using 4-H program. That program provides the people who is in the agriculture or any other areas they are working, they're providing kids some education and helping them to do better. And I think this is the success story also. And it can be applied for many countries. I don't know in Indonesia, but 4-H program can be applied also.
Thank you, Prof. Musa. We have a lot of questions coming in on the chat box. So the next one from Hatalia to Prof. Jean-Michel. If only there is a new or another emerging disease in the future, as a doctor, what shall we do as an intervention to prevent or to fix the spreading, judging from what happened in COVID-19?
Thank you for that question. We are learning a lot. We have been learning a lot, especially from COVID-19, but also from prior diseases, of course, as well. I think what we take out as lesson really certainly is that critical is reporting new diseases that are perhaps unknown or appear in a new way. They have to be reported, and openness, international openness is really critical there. So that's one thing. Then the second step is to contain. If a disease emerges and we recognize its potential threat, we have to contain it. I think in the future, airplanes stopping to fly into countries will go very, very quickly. You know, we lost a lot of time because we didn't know we had to learn. I think in the future that will be much quicker. Countries will close their borders also much more quickly, which all in all is also a danger. We should not forget that we are depending on our economy, and that includes also traveling, of course. And I think the third point I would like to point out is international cooperation. We have to work together. We have to exchange information. We have to be open with each other. We have to be fair with each other. I think this is very critical, and especially the way we will be dealing with vaccines, how we will distribute vaccines, how we will give access to vaccines in the world will be a very challenging task. And I look forward to see how this will be handled. And I think the World Health Organization is certainly a very important platform in this respect. I hope this answers the questions.
Well, thank you very much. I do agree with you about the transparency and also data collections about the disease once we identify unknown disease. All right, move to next question from Rumi Sahara to Prof. Musa. What effort do you think to make young people aware of the future need of their role to provide healthy animal sources food?
One of the things is, especially when we look or we ask, especially farmers' children in our country, or I see in some literature also, they say they are not looking to continue. And one of the reasons villagers goes to the cities, and because it is hard work over there. It is not easy. We may see that nice animals, but you have to take care of all those animals 24 hours. You cannot go to visit your children, your grandson or granddaughter. Many people they are facing, because of that reason, they are quitting what they are producing, especially when they get old. And young people, they are seeing this, and for that reason, they are not planning to continue. We need to change what we are doing right now. We have to provide them a more efficient way that they don't have to spend 24 hours with the animals. Probably this will be the technology we should provide the farmers. This will bring more people into the farming sector. And Otherwise, we are not going to see many people who is working in the farmland. And this will be more burden on the countries because people, they are not going to provide the food. In regular, I mentioned about the 4-H programs in United States. One of the things programs providing the children to understand what they are doing. And we need to understand those people. They are doing important jobs. Most of the time we don't thanks to them. We say, oh, they are doing their job. No, they are providing food for us.
All right. Thank you for the answer. So we have more questions coming in. So I'm not sure if we'll be able to, I try to, address all the questions. So 2 more questions for Professor Jean-Michel. How reduced diversity contributes to new emerging disease? Because you mentioned about 5 diseases appear every year. How could this happen? The next question, same to you, Prof. Jean. How to improve people habits in controlling and overcoming the re-emerging or new emerging disease, especially zoonotic disease?
Okay, thank you. I think regarding the first question, I would like to point out the aspect of monoculture. Obviously, if you reduce the number of species, a variety also is a barrier, because for certain diseases there are better hosts, but also hosts that are maybe immune or hosts that are not ideal. So a disease has more challenge in a more varied let's say ecosystem than in a monoculture, where once an infectious agent is adapted to this monoculture, it can spread and multiply in a much more important way, and also cause much more damage. So I think especially from plant industry, we know that very well, that monocultures are very critical there. And so reducing the number of species reduces also certain barriers. With respect to the second question about people's habits, and I think this might also go in the next questions about the bushmeat aspect. If I understand that correct, of course, the bushmeat issue is important, or can have an effect in emerging diseases, but live organisms are, compared to a dead organism, a live organism is much more powerful transmitter of diseases, because it can also multiply diseases. Let's say in a piece of meat, it's difficult for an organism to basically increase, especially viruses that need live cells. So of course, I don't want to say bushmeat is no issue, but as we have seen in now in the corona case, but also already with SARS, but now again with COVID, wildlife markets are really critical. And I think this is also something that in Indonesia, we have live wildlife being sold. These animals are highly stressed. They might get in contact with other species. So if we mix certain species alive in a highly stressed circumstances with a lot of people there, and potentially also farm animals, chicken, and other species, this is the really where infectious agents have an ideal condition and can basically then become dangerous.
Thank you. So more question coming in. So these 2 following questions for Prof. David. So one from Dr. Hambal: as we are parasitologists and a lot of new emerging diseases come from virus or bacteria, do you agree that the role of parasitic disease is declining, or do you have opposite proof? The other one from Ainaya. She has questions about parasites play a small role in the disease threats animal, especially wildlife. What do you agree with that statement, or do you have the opposite understanding?
Thank you for this good question. Definitely, the diversity of viruses which are important, the source of emerging diseases is much higher than in case of parasites. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the parasites doesn't have importance. There are several parasites, specifically those that are entering the food webs or entering the ecosystems that remain endemic in the newly colonized areas and can be a real threat. Nice example in wildlife is, for example, avian malaria. It's an issue for all the islands all around the world, the tropical islands. We see the cases in Polynesia, Hawaii, basically everywhere. Other issue which is important, emerging disease, is Angiostrongylus cantonensis that I work with Professor Hambal. It's a disease that very newly reached Mediterranean islands. It's emerging disease in Mediterranean, it's emerging disease in Canary Islands, in many parts of the Asia, America, Caribbean, and it's causing deadly disease in humans, the meningitis in humans. In Hawaii, it's one of the most prominent emerging diseases perceived by the public. Yeah, so yes, viruses are more, but still there is a range of important parasitic diseases that really can have the emerging disease attributes.
Thank you. And I hope this is the last one for Prof. Jean-Michel from Awaluddin. During this global war, what kind of strategy to protect livestock and human health from a possible transmission of disease from wildlife? For example, like in our place, from animal-human conflict could infect also human.
Thank you. Great, all these questions. Fantastic. As I mean, the aspect of human animal-human conflict, I think, is not per se an issue then with respect to so much with respect to disease transmission. As I have observed, and maybe I'm wrong, but in Indonesia, it's especially also about damages to agriculture, to fields, to plants. Of course, by pushing these animals then into areas maybe where they have higher densities, where that can be an issue. But the main issue there is certainly the damage. On the other hand, the globalization, of course, is the challenge, because it opens up the doors for species to being integrated in areas where they have not evolved, and might then be especially challenged by certain diseases, or also might multiply infections agents, and which eventually could be an emerging infectious diseases. So I think in general, it's about balance. And with regard to the farm animals, of course, there we have the means to protect them, to maybe also keep them, like in poultry, that are often kept under very, very, I would say, nearly sterile conditions, to protect them. Also pork farming is also in that direction, and of course we have to see there that we protect these species from diseases. But it's, at the end, it's all a question of balance, of awareness, of quick reaction, but also of amounts. I think this could nearly be a closing statement, but we have to always consider, how much do we need? You know, how much meat do we really need? How much milk do we really need? How much woods do we really need? How much oil and other products do we need from nature? And nature has a capacity to buffer a lot, also with respect to diseases. But we have to be attentive to what extent the nature can buffer, and when a limit has been reached.
Thank you. That's really, really impactful. I would say that the explanations about the questions is how much nature could buffer up the demand from society and global population. So we have the very last questions from Andy to Prof. David. Can we prevent a vector-borne disease in wildlife?
Now, yeah. If we speak about emerging disease, there are not that many that are vector-borne, and commonly they are associated with introduced vectors. So, but preventing vector-borne diseases in wildlife, it's almost impossible. Basically, preventing any disease in real wildlife, if we speak in broad context of population, is difficult. And the West Nile virus, which was mentioned just a few minutes ago, it's a nice example because it's transmitted by common mosquitoes all across the United States nowadays. It has the wildlife reservoir, and basically we cannot control that. Yeah, so what we can is to prevent that, prevent the introduction of new vectors and prevent the introduction of the new diseases. Once it is established, it's very difficult to control, and we have hundreds of examples of such cases.
All right, thank you so much to all the speakers for sharing your expertise, your experience, all the informations. And I think we already like 30 minutes over the time, but this is very fruitful discussions and sharing session. I would say that the information shared by Prof. Jean-Michel, Prof. David, and also Prof. Musa has given, I would say, different perspective on looking how this infectious disease and from the veterinarian aspect, and how we are the community researcher, as well as in one global society, need to act upon what is happening to our earth. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks again. Get well soon, Prof. Jean-Michel. I know you are in quarantine. And to Prof. Musa, I'm sorry to hear that you have to go through all the experience. But I hope that everyone stays safe, keep the safe distance, and practice, all the hand washing frequently, and wearing masks, because in Malaysia things are quite alarming at the moment. But I hope that that's not the case for the rest of you out there. So be safe, and hope to see you guys in the future again. So thank you so much for the conference committee for inviting me to be part of the session. Thank you again, till we meet again in the future.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Stay safe.
Thank you, Dr. Nur Halidas. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at the end of the plenary sessions. So please welcome Dr. Reza Ferashi, the Dean of Faculty of Vet Medicine, Universitas Syah Kuala, to give the closing remarks for today.
Thank you, Dr. Rosa, but we complete this first day panel session. The committee would like to show you, to give you a virtual certificate. I think Dr. Hambal will manage this handing certificate. Please, Dr. Hambal. Please, Dr. Awal.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pak Reza. And please allow me to express my gratitude that it's really, I enjoy the presentation and also the question and the end, the discussion. So, I will first give the certificate to David Modri. Thank you very much. I hope this certificate will bring you to come to Banda Aceh as soon as possible.
I hope so. I believe that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And then Professor Musa Yafuz, I think many of my colleagues has been to your university, including Pak Reza, and it was very sad that when you want to come to Banda Aceh, that it was the pandemic. I hope the pandemic will be over soon, and you can also come to Banda Aceh. Please allow me to give it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and then Jean-Michel, thank you very much. And I hope our collaboration to have the international wildlife course will continue successfully, and we also are looking forward to you to come here to Banda Aceh. Please receive this certificate.
Thank you very much, Hambal. It's great to see you. And yes, I look forward to come back to Banda Aceh very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hambal, for handing all the certificates to for handing all the certificates to all right, sorry for a little bit swing. Thank you very much for all the speakers. I noticed that we are already here in this virtual conference hall, since for us in Banda Aceh and also in for Professor Graham in Australia and Dr. Nur Khalida in Malaysia, and all participants here already joined at the virtual room for this conference since this morning, starting at 8 a.m. in the morning in our place, and then we ran for the first session of the panel session for 3 keynote speakers in the morning after the opening ceremony by our rector, Professor Dr. Insinyur Samsul Rizal. In the morning, there were 3 speakers. They are Professor Dr. Hewan Sri Adi Agung Priyono, and then Professor Graham Martin, and completed this session by Dr. Nur Khalida Abdul Hamid. And then this afternoon, we were continued with another 3 speakers from Western continent, Professor David Modri, and then Professor Musa Yafuz, and then Professor Jean-Michel. I observed that the participants commit to join this conference from the morning till this afternoon, and there are many questions addressed to all the speakers. The topic we were talking today was very comprehensive, I think, from different field, different area, but all of you already make this integrate in one conclusion, I think. So we were talking about the animal disease and the livestock disease and livestock production, and then aquatic production and health as well. And then we also talk about the wildlife disease and human disease as well. This is bring us all to understand how the COVID-19 that we are facing now is the result of many, can be from several activities that are also related with the animal, in particular with wildlife. You know that the coronavirus is was found from several wild animal, and then now it is also infected from human to human with the COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2. From this perspective, we learn a lot how we should live in harmony actually with the 3 concepts, the 3 aspects of One Health, animal, human, and environment. So the stabilization of these 3 components will bring us can live in harmony in this world, of course. I noticed that there are several, I think many information that we just learned from this presentation, which maybe some of you never heard before, including some new term, for example, from Professor Musa. It is the first time I heard about the term positive discrimination, which before discrimination mean negative, but now you can bring the term to be positive, looking positive in this context of animal production and also healthy food, and also how we can stimulate the community to work together to prepare for the future of healthy food. And then there are also a term told to us by Professor Graham Martin in the morning on the clean, green, and ethical, which also mean how we can keep the food that safe and then profit the food from the animal that concerned with animal welfare, and also non-toxic or non-dangerous material that used to increase the animal production. And of course, in the wildlife area, Professor Modri and Professor Jean-Michel already mentions as well some information that we need to learn and of course do some research and explore more on how the link between animal disease, especially in wildlife, and to human health as well. Dr. Khalida told us about the material that we can obtain from aquatic animal, then can be used as well for the future to produce healthy food as well. Prof. Yoni from Indonesia mentioning about the harmony of life between animal, human, and environment. All of this very important for us to think for how in the future we can work together. I mean, this put a big heavy task in our shoulder as a scientist to profit and serve with alternative strategy that can result from our research, of course, from long-term study to give a new strategy to solve many challenges. I won't say there's a problem, but we say that the challenge means we have to solve this challenge. But the problem sometimes makes people stress. But when we think it's a challenge, everyone will think how we solve this challenge to bring a new, a better life in the future. And of course, this challenge is the result of several activities conducted by human, especially what I know regarding the transborder disease, the spread of disease that cause a pandemic. It is a part of the global activity regarding the trade, tourism, transportation, and travel. So of this thing need to be, of course, we want to stop traveling. We want to stop, we don't want to stop transportation and tourism. Like Professor Jean-Michel said, no, we can go anywhere like we like before, but we now need to put concern on how we can travel safely to other place next in the future. From one health aspect, we learned that we need to put our effort need to be done together, synergetically for the benefit of all. And it is not only to protect animal health, actually, but also to provide healthy animal for human food. I think that's the final closing remark from me for this for today session. We hope everyone enjoy today presentation from all speakers and can get some new idea how we can collaborate, how we can discuss for the future research and also research collaboration, or maybe lecture or training, workshop, and other scientific activity between all of us. Thank you very much again for all speakers from different continents, Indonesia, Australia, Malaysia, Czech Republic, Switzerland, and also Turkey. We expect that maybe all of you are also still able to join the presentation tomorrow from different, 4 different rooms, different topics, from the morning till midday of Friday tomorrow. Maybe in Europe it's still dark when we are in the morning, but it is also possible sometimes. Thank you very much, and I return to the Master of Ceremony, to Dr. Hasan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reza Ferashi, the Dean of Faculty of Vet Science, Universitas Syah Kuala. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for today, for your participation. And then see you again soon.
Take picture first.
Oh yeah. But at the end, we would like to take pictures together. So please, for all of the participants, can turn on the camera.
Okay, smile. Okay. Okay, be patient. We have several pages of us, so the committee will take a picture from different pages. Okay, finish. Oh, yeah, please be patient. Still some more pictures. Okay, thank you very much for the great committee of this conference. And thank you very much for all speakers. Thank you, Dr. Musa. Thank you, David Modri, Jean-Michel, Dr. Khalida.
Thank you, everybody.
Prof. Graham maybe still with us. But I think Australia already night, already dark. Okay.
Okay.